The pump had always told Eliza Bennett what kind of day she was going to have. On cool mornings it answered after 6 strokes, coughing once before the water ran clear. In summer it took longer. The handle grew hot enough to sting the palm. The iron rod complained somewhere under the ground, and the first water came up warm and cloudy, before the deep well gave anything worth drinking. That evening the handle had reached 9 strokes when hoofbeats came over the ridge. Eliza kept pumping. The bucket below the spout was nearly full. She watched the water climb instead of turning toward the road. The sun was dropping behind the broken hills west of the ranch, lighting the dust in copper. A washcloth hung stiff on the porch rail. Her father's old saddle rested over the fence where she had left it after oiling the skirts. Ordinary things. Things that belonged to a day that should have ended with supper and a lamp at the kitchen table. The horses stopped by the gate. Eliza, she knew Caleb Miller's voice. She had known it since she was small enough to sit on the counter of his store while her father argued with him over the price of coffee. Caleb was sheriff now, although he still spent more hours behind the general store counter than behind the desk under the tin star. She pumped once more. Water spilled over the bucket and soaked the toes of her boots. When she finally turned, Caleb was looking at the ground. The man beside him did not have that problem. He sat straight in a black coat too heavy for the weather, one hand on the saddle horn and the other around a leather folio. His boots were clean, his horse was not. White salt had dried in streaks along the animal's neck. "Miss Bennett," the stranger said. "I'm Mr. Hale acting on behalf of Mr. Silas Thorne." Eliza let go of the pump handle. It dropped with a metal knock. Caleb removed his hat. "There's a paper you need to see." The stranger dismounted and crossed the yard without waiting to be invited. He drew a folded document from the folio and offered it to her. The paper was thick and expensive. The ink smelled faintly sharp in the evening heat. She read the amount twice, $2,000. Her father, Jedediah Bennett, was said to have borrowed it against the ranch 6 months before his death. The debt had supposedly begun as gambling losses and had been consolidated into a private note held by one of Thorne's associates. The note was secured by the deed to the Bennett homestead and witnessed in Gilded Creek. At the bottom was her father's name, Jedediah Bennett. Eliza stared at it until the letters stopped looking like letters. "That isn't his hand." Mr. Hale smiled with the patience of a man explaining arithmetic to a child. "It has been accepted as his hand by 3 witnesses. My father didn't gamble." Caleb shifted his weight. Eliza looked at him. "You know that." He rubbed the brim of his hat with his thumb. "I know what I knew of him." "What is that supposed to mean, Eliza? What does it mean?" The stranger answered for him. "It means men sometimes keep their failures private." The water kept dripping from the pump spout behind her. One drop, then another. The sound seemed louder than the horse's breathing. "When does Thorne intend to take the place?" "If the debt is not satisfied by the end of the month, possession transfers under the security agreement. That gives me 9 days. 8, technically. Papers were filed yesterday." Eliza folded the notice along the crease and folded it again. Mr. Hale watched her as though waiting for tears. He got none. "Tell Mr. Thorne I'll speak to him tomorrow. He will be at the bank after 10. I know where he sits." Caleb finally raised his eyes. There was apology in them. But apology was a poor thing to bring a woman when you were helping someone take her house. They rode away before dark. Eliza carried the full bucket inside. She poured half into the basin, washed the dust from her hands, and stood for a long time with the towel pressed between both palms. The house smelled faintly of cedar, lamp oil, and the pipe tobacco her father had not smoked for 7 weeks. 7 weeks, long enough for the casseroles from neighbors to stop arriving. Long enough for people to begin speaking of Jedediah in the past tense without lowering their voices. Long enough, apparently, for Silas Thorne to decide the grave had settled. Eliza lit the kerosene lamp and placed the debt notice on the kitchen table. Then she went to the parlor. Her father's desk was still exactly as he had left it. A pencil sharpened with a pocket knife, a brass ruler, a small square of chamois used to wipe his spectacles, 2 seed catalogs, one open to a page on drought-resistant sorghum. She put her hand on the chair back but did not sit. There was something she needed from beneath the floorboards. She knelt near the wall, worked a loose plank up with the tip of a kitchen knife, and lifted out a flat tin box. Inside were the letters. Her mother had tied them with blue ribbon when the ribbon was still truly blue. Age had faded it to gray. Jedediah had written most of the letters during the years when he was away on cattle drives and seasonal work. Some were addressed from Texas, some from New Mexico, some from camps so temporary he had identified them by creek beds and mountain passes instead of towns. Eliza carried the bundle to the kitchen. She chose one at random and laid it beside the debt notice. The difference did not announce itself at first. Both signatures leaned slightly forward. Both had the long cross on the final T. Both bent the capital J in the same narrow hook. But the genuine signature moved. That was the only way she could think to describe it. Her father's handwriting had momentum. The forged-looking signature at the bottom of the notice appeared assembled, one careful portion after another. She brought the lamp closer. Her pulse began to climb. The B in Bennett was wrong, not wildly wrong, not enough for a stranger to notice, but her father made the lower loop in one quick sweep. The notice showed a tiny break where the pen had stopped before completing the curve. Eliza sat down. For the first time since the writers had arrived, fear found a place to enter. Not fear that her father had gambled. Fear that someone had worked hard enough to make it look as if he had. The Gilded Creek Bank was built to make people feel smaller than their money. The ceiling was high. The counter was polished mahogany. Brass bars separated the customers from the clerks. Even the clock seemed expensive, a tall imported thing that ticked with slow confidence from the far wall. Eliza entered at 10:15 in the same brown skirt she had worn the day before. She had brushed it clean, but the red ranch dust had worked permanently into the hem. Silas Thorne received her in the back office. He was a broad man in his early 50s, with thinning hair combed carefully over his scalp and fingers that looked as though they had never repaired anything in their lives. His desk was covered with neatly stacked papers. A silver pen rested beside his right hand. The ledger was already open. Miss Bennett. He gestured toward a chair. She remained standing. I'm told you object to the claim. I object to the lie. Thorne sighed softly. Your father's death was difficult enough. I would rather not see you make the aftermath worse for yourself. You mean by asking questions. I mean by refusing facts. He turned the ledger so she could see it. There, under a list of dates and figures, was another version of Jedediah's name. This one was better than the signature on the legal notice. Eliza felt a sick twist beneath her ribs. Thorne watched her notice. $2,000, he said, not borrowed all at once. Losses carried forward, private advances, interest, finally a consolidation. Your father was proud. He hid it well. You expect me to believe he played cards with money he didn't have? I expect nothing. Belief is your concern. Records are mine. She leaned closer to the ledger without touching it. The page had yellowed at the edges, but the ink of her father's supposed signature looked very dark. How old is this entry? 6 months? And the witnesses available if a court requires them. Names. Thorne smiled. You may obtain them through proper petition, so you won't tell me. I'm not here to ease your grief, Miss Bennett. I am here to settle an account. His chair creaked when he leaned back. I can offer you a kindness, $500 for the remaining livestock and the outbuildings. You walk away before the forfeiture, and the matter ends quietly. The ranch is worth 12 times that. Not under a secured debt it isn't. My father cleared the north pasture by hand. A touching fact. He dug the first 60 feet of the well himself before he could afford help. I'm sure he did. He never signed that page. Thorne's expression changed by less than an inch, but it changed. Eliza saw it. He lowered his hand over the ledger. The law is not a family memory, he said. It is ink. Eliza looked at the silver pen beside his hand. There was violet-black staining near the split nib. Then she looked at his thumb. The same color had gathered in the cuticle. She did not know yet what that meant. She knew only that she wanted to remember it. She left the bank with Thorne's offer still on the desk. By noon, Gilded Creek had heard the story. At Caleb Miller's store, she put flour, coffee, lard, and lamp oil on the counter. Caleb stared at the items. I need cash. You've carried us through dry months before. That was before my father died? He winced before the claim. A claim is not a judgment. It is enough that my supplier in Prescott won't extend me more credit against accounts that might not be collected. Eliza took out her coin purse. She counted. The coffee went back first, then the lamp oil. She paid for the flour and half the lard. Caleb wrapped the lard in paper. Eliza, I'm sorry. She picked up the sack of flour. No, you're careful. He looked worse after that than if she had cursed him. On the road home, a black carriage blocked the narrowest section between two dry washes. A man in a gray suit stepped down and introduced himself as Reuben Sloane. Eliza had seen him in Thorne's company twice. "I have authority to make you an offer," Sloane said. "I already heard the offer. This is separate. Cash for a voluntary surrender of all claims. $700. You people seem worried about how voluntarily I leave." His smile tightened. "Miss Bennett, there is dignity in recognizing when a matter is finished." Eliza looked past him at the carriage. New paint, brass lamps, a driver in a clean collar. The horses wore silver buckles. "My father used to say men who talk too much about dignity are usually asking somebody else to swallow theirs." Sloane's smile disappeared. She flicked the reins. He stepped aside late enough that the wagon wheel passed within inches of his boot. The ranch seemed empty when she returned. Not peaceful. Empty. Eliza put the flour away, checked the trough, fed the mule, and repaired a break in the chicken wire near the garden. She worked until the sun began to fade because work had edges, and fear did not. She had just carried the shotgun onto the porch when the crickets stopped. A rider stood beyond the south fence. He was not trying to hide. That made him more unsettling. The horse was a lean buckskin mare. The rider wore a faded brown shirt under a weathered vest, with a rifle in a scabbard behind his leg. His hair, streaked with gray at the temples, was tied at the nape. He appeared to be in his 40s, perhaps older. The desert made guesses about age unreliable. Eliza raised the shotgun. "That's close enough." The man stopped. Wind moved through the dry grass between them. "I heard Jedediah died," he said. "Most people did. I was farther south." "Who are you?" His gaze moved to the nearest fence post. "The top rail is pulling out." Eliza tightened her grip. "I asked your name." The man dismounted. Chaz Nalwood. She knew it. Not from town. From her father. Jedediah had once spent a winter scouting supply routes for an army detachment and later refused to speak much about it. But one name had survived those stories. Chaz, the Apache scout who found him after a horse broke his leg in a snowstorm. The man who shared a blanket and half a strip of dried meat with him for 2 nights until help came. Eliza did not lower the gun. "That was 20 years ago." 22. "How do I know you're him?" Chaz walked to the cedar post beside the gate. He crouched and ran his thumb beneath the top rail. Then he pressed inward at a notch hidden from ordinary view. The rail shifted a 1/4 inch and locked. "Your father and I set this section after the monsoon of '76, he said. "He cut the mortise too wide," I told him. "He said the wood would swell." Despite herself, Eliza almost smiled. "That sounds like him." He was wrong. That also sounds like him. Chaz looked at her then. Little Wren. The shotgun lowered by itself. Her father had called her that until she was 12. No one else had. Eliza sat on the porch step while Chaz watered his mare. She told him about the debt. Not every feeling, just the facts. $2,000. The ledger. The witnesses no one would name. Thorne's offer. The deadline. Chaz listened without interrupting. When she finished, she brought out the red cedar letters and the copy of the legal notice. He washed his hands at the pump before touching them. That small act unsettled her more than any speech might have. He studied the signatures under the lamplight. After several minutes, he reached beneath his shirt and drew out a brass-rimmed magnifying lens on a leather cord. "You carry that?" "For tracks, splinters, cartridge marks, whatever needs a closer look." He moved the lens over the legal notice. "Here." Eliza leaned beside him. The bee enlarged beneath the glass. The hesitation was obvious now. "There's a stop," she said. "Yes. A forger? Maybe." "You don't sound convinced." "A copied hand can hesitate. A sick hand can hesitate. A frightened hand can hesitate. One mark is not enough." He shifted to the genuine letters. "Your father pressed hard. He always did. See the groove." Eliza tilted the paper toward the lamp. Even decades later, the stroke had dented the fibers. Chaz returned to the legal notice. The imitation signature sat flatter on the page. "We need the ledger itself," he said. "Thorne won't give it to us." "No. You're suggesting we steal it?" "I'm suggesting we learn what it says." "That sounds like stealing with better manners." "It may." Eliza folded her arms. Chaz's mouth moved slightly. Not a smile exactly, but close. The next morning he was in the irrigation ditch before she was. The channel had filled with silt during the last flood. Jedediah's illness had left Eliza with enough work for 3 people, and the ditch had fallen to the bottom of the list until the alfalfa began to brown. Chaz did not ask whether she wanted help. He took the shovel with the cracked ash handle, examined the edge, sharpened it with a file from the barn, and began at the lower gate. Eliza joined him with the second shovel. For 2 hours they spoke only when the work required it. "Lift. Hold that board. Stone under here." More to the left, the sun climbed. Mud dried on their forearms. A red sandstone boulder wedged in the narrow channel refused to move. Eliza tried a pry bar, slipped and barked her shin. Chasky said nothing about the blood running into her sock. He wedged a second bar beneath the stone. Together, they leaned. The rock shifted. Water punched through the opening with a brown rush, carrying leaves, twigs, and a dead beetle downstream. Eliza sat in the mud and laughed once, surprised by the sound. Chask looked at her. "What? Nothing. You looked like it was something. You laughed like your father." The laughter stopped. Not painfully, just carefully. Later, while Eliza washed tools at the trough, Chask walked toward the front gate and crouched. "There were riders here last night. How many?" "2. One stayed farther back." "Thorne? Maybe his people." He pointed to a deep hoof mark near the mesquite. "They waited long enough for the horse to shift twice. Whoever was here watched the house." Eliza glanced toward the ridge. The open land suddenly felt less open. Chasky stood. "Tonight we keep the lamps low." Silas Thorne came the following afternoon. This time he brought Caleb and a deputy. Thorne remained on horseback. 4 days, he called. Eliza stepped onto the porch. "You said end of the month." "It is the end of the month in 4 days. I can count. I came to make certain you were not confused by the calendar." His gaze moved to Chasky, who stood near the barn repairing a bridle. "Your guest remains. He has a name. So do rattlesnakes." Caleb looked away. Chasky did not. Thorne drew a rolled map from his saddlebag and pointed with his silver pen toward the south pasture. "Once possession transfers, my men will begin surveying immediately. I suggest you have personal items removed." The pen slipped from his fingers. It hit the porch and rolled. Chask reached it first. He picked it up by the barrel, then paused. The nib was dark with the same violet-black ink Eliza had seen in the bank. Chask lifted it toward the sun. Thorne's face tightened. "Give me that." Chask handed it back. Their fingers touched for only a moment. When Thorne took the pen, Chasky looked at the man's thumb, fresh stain. Eliza saw him see it. Nothing else was said. Thorne rode away, after Caleb muttered something about returning with formal possession papers. That evening, Chasky placed one of Jedediah's old letters beside a clean sheet on the kitchen table. "What kind of ink did your father use?" "Whatever he could afford. Look." He showed her the brown cast in the old lines. "Iron gall," Eliza said. "He made some himself, oak galls and caperas. My mother hated the smell. And Thorne's ink? Purple-black, newer formula. It stays darker." "That doesn't prove the ledger entry is new. Someone could have used new ink 6 months ago." "No, but it gives us something to test." "How?" "We get close to the book." The storm arrived the next evening. Clouds had been building all afternoon over the northern ridge, turning the light yellow and strange. Near dusk, the wind came hard enough to slam the barn door. Then rain struck the roof in scattered heavy drops. By the time Eliza and Chasky reached Gilded Creek, the street was flowing mud. Chask tied his mare in the alley behind the bank. "You are certain?" he asked. "No, that wasn't the question." Eliza pulled her soaked shawl tighter. "I'm going in." She entered through the front door looking like exactly what she was: exhausted, wet, angry, and close to losing everything. Barnaby Finch was behind the brass grill. He was a narrow man with a pale mustache and a habit of clicking his teeth when nervous. Eliza had known him for years, without ever really seeing him. Now she noticed everything: the ink on his fingers, the quick movement of his eyes, the way he glanced toward Thorne's office when she asked for the manager. "I need to see the original ledger," she said loudly. "Miss Bennett, we have discussed." "I have discussed nothing with you." Several customers turned. Finch lowered his voice. "Please, I want the book that is taking my house." The manager emerged from the back. Eliza let her face crumple. It was easier than she expected. Some of the tears were performance. Some were not. She gripped the counter and said her father's name too loudly. She accused the bank of hiding records. She demanded witnesses. She demanded the sheriff. She demanded Silas Thorne. The manager tried to guide her toward his office before the scene damaged the dignity of the institution. Eliza went willingly. The whole front room turned toward her. Behind the building, Chasky moved. The rain covered the sound of the side window lifting. He entered a storeroom, crossed a narrow hall, and waited until the manager's voice rose beyond the office door. The records room was unlocked. That told him more about the bank's confidence than any guard could have. He found the ledger on a rear desk. Chask did not remove it. He opened to the Bennett entry and set the magnifier over the signature. The hitch in the B was there, so was a second hesitation near the last T. He took a thin sheet of translucent silk from his pocket, laid it over the name, and rubbed the back lightly with a smooth piece of charcoal wrapped in cloth. The pressure marks transferred just enough to preserve the pattern without damaging the page. Then he examined the ink. Dark. Too dark. He leaned close enough to smell it. Sharp, chemical, faintly acidic. A footstep sounded in the hall. Chaz closed the book and restored it to the exact angle where he had found it. The handle turned. He went up, not out. A transom window sat above the records room door. By the time the clerk entered, Chaz had pulled himself through and flattened along the dark upper ledge of the hallway. The clerk below muttered, found whatever file he had come for, and left. Chaz slipped out the side window less than a minute later. Eliza was still crying in the manager's office when he tapped once against the exterior wall, their signal. She stopped mid-sentence. The manager, sweating through his collar, looked relieved. "I am glad you have finally composed yourself." Eliza wiped her face with both hands. "So am I." She walked out before he understood what had changed. They rode home through the rain. Neither spoke until the bank lights were far behind them. Then Chaz said, "The signature is copied." "You're sure?" "Yes." "And the ink?" "Recent enough to question. Different from your father's." Eliza breathed out. Rain ran off the edge of her hat. "We can prove it?" "We can prove someone copied him. That's not the same as proving who, no." She knew that tone now. It meant the trail had narrowed. At the ranch, they spread the silk impression beside the red cedar letters. The repeated hesitation was unmistakable. Eliza stared at it, and another memory rose. Barnaby Finch stamping documents in the bank. Click, click of his teeth whenever Silas Thorne entered. His fingers trembling slightly when asked to copy formal names into the register. The precise way he formed capital letters. Finch. Chaz looked up. Barnaby Finch. Why? He had access. He copies deeds all day. He's seen my father's signature on tax records and cattle notes. And when Thorne came into the bank tonight, Finch nearly stopped breathing. Thorne was there? In the back office. I heard his voice. Eliza thought of the clerk's pale face. He left town last week, she said slowly. Caleb mentioned it when I asked about witnesses. Said Finch had been transferred to a territorial outpost. Where? San Carlos. Chaz leaned back. That is not a transfer people request. No, the clock ticked. A gust pushed rain under the door. Eliza looked at the false signature again. If Finch did it, Thorne sent him away, or Finch ran. Either way, he knows. Chaz nodded. The possession order is in 3 days. San Carlos is nearly 3 days if the trail is dry. It won't be dry. Eliza stood. Then we leave before dawn. Chaz studied her for a moment. You may lose the ranch while we are gone. I lose it if I stay. That ended the question. Before sunrise, Eliza packed 2 blankets, hard bread, salt pork, coffee, a tin of matches sealed in wax, and the red cedar letters wrapped in oilcloth. She tucked her father's field glasses into the saddlebag. At the barn door, she stopped. The ranch lay in blue morning shadow. The porch boards were damp from the storm. Water shone in the irrigation ditch they had cleared. The pump handle stood black against the paling sky. She had never left home with so much at stake. Chaz tightened the cinch on his mare. You can still turn back, he said. So can you. He looked at her. That is true. Neither did. They rode east while the first light touched the tops of the mesas, leaving the Bennett house behind with its windows dark and its door locked, not abandoned, only waiting. The storm had scrubbed the sky clean, but it had done nothing to soften the land. By 8 in the morning, the road was already steaming. Shallow puddles gathered in wagon ruts, reflecting a blue so bright it hurt the eyes, while the surrounding flats hardened back into pale crust. The horses picked their way around slick clay and loose stone. Chaz rode half a length ahead. Eliza had expected conversation once they were beyond the ranch, if only because 2 people sharing a 3-day trail seemed bound to fill some of it with words. Chaz did not appear burdened by that expectation. He watched the country, not dramatically, not as if every bush hid an assassin. His attention was practical and constant. A broken stem, a shoe mark near a wash, ravens lifting from somewhere ahead, the change in color where water had recently crossed the road. After an hour, Eliza stopped noticing his silence as absence. At mid-morning, they found 3 fresh horseshoe prints beside the main trail. Chaz dismounted. Eliza stayed in the saddle. Thorne's men could be anyone. You always say that. When I know, I'll say I know. He touched the edge of one print, shod yesterday or the day before. One horse has a chipped left hind shoe. Does that matter if we see it again? He remounted. Near noon, they reached the alkali flats. White crust stretched across the basin like old salt. Heat rose from it in waves. The nearest ridge looked close enough to touch and remained the same size for 2 hours. They covered their mouths with damp cloth. The horses slowed. Eliza rationed water by the swallow and hated herself every time she heard her mare work her tongue against the bit. At one point she looked back. Their tracks ran behind them in a clean line until the wind reached them and began wiping them away. "My father hated this crossing," she said. Chaz glanced over. He said the flats were made to teach pride a lesson. Jedediah had strong opinions about land. He had strong opinions about everything. Yes, did he ever tell you what happened the winter you found him? Only that his horse broke a leg. Chasky's eyes returned to the horizon. He had lied to the lieutenant about the route. Eliza frowned. "My father? He said the western pass was open. It was not. That doesn't sound like him." He had guessed and did not want to admit it. She laughed before she could stop herself. Chaz gave her a sideways look. "What?" "I spent a week defending the idea that he never lied. There are lies that steal and lies that make a man look foolish. He would hate that distinction. He did. What happened? The storm caught us. His horse went down. He broke 2 ribs. I told him if he died I would tell everyone he was wrong about the pass. And that kept him alive? No. Anger kept him warm." That sounded so perfectly like Jedediah that Eliza had to look away. They rested the horses in the narrow shade of a basalt outcrop. Chaz checked the mare's hooves. The left hind shoe had picked up a pebble. He worked it loose with the tip of his knife. Eliza chewed hard bread softened with water. "How long did you know him?" "Off and on for many years." "He never brought you to the ranch." "I came twice." "When?" "Before you remember." "Why didn't he talk about you more?" Chasky cleaned the knife. "Your father and I were friends in a time neither of us liked remembering." The answer closed the door without slamming it. Eliza respected that. They moved again in the afternoon. The first sign that someone was waiting came from the ravens. 2 birds rose from a wash ahead and circled rather than flying away. Chaz lifted one hand. They stopped behind a low ridge. He slid down from the saddle and crawled to the crest. Eliza followed with her father's field glasses. A man sat astride a gray horse in the narrow pass below. He wore a broad hat and carried a Winchester openly across his lap. "Friend of yours," Eliza whispered. "No, how comforting. The pass was the fastest route to San Carlos. Going around would cost half a day." The man below had positioned himself where a horse could not approach without being exposed for 60 yards. Maybe he only wants shade. He chose the one place with no shade. Eliza lowered the glasses. "What do we do?" "Wait. That costs time. Getting shot costs more." They waited. The man did not move. After 20 minutes, Chasky took a small paper packet from his saddlebag. "What's that?" "Flash powder." Eliza stared at him. "You carry flash powder. I traded for it from a photographer." "For what?" "Today." He moved downslope, keeping the ridge between himself and the gunman. Eliza watched him disappear into a shallow gully. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The gunman shifted in his saddle. A bright white burst exploded against the rocks to his right. The gray horse reared. The rider grabbed for the reins with both hands, lost his rifle, and swore loud enough for Eliza to hear. The horse spun and bolted down the pass. Chaz appeared from the gully. "Ride." They did. Eliza could not stop grinning for the next mile. "You could have warned me. You might have looked pleased." "I was pleased." "Exactly." At a bend in the trail they found the fallen rifle. Chaz picked it up, opened the action, removed the cartridges, and left the empty gun propped against a rock. "He'll come back for it," Eliza said. "Yes. Wouldn't it be safer to take it?" "Safer for us. Worse if he decides he needs another one." Eliza thought about that. "You make a strange outlaw." "We are not outlaws." "We broke into a bank. You broke into nothing. You climbed through a window. That window was open." "It was not. It opened." Eliza laughed again. The sound felt almost indecent after the weeks behind her. Toward evening, the trail entered broken red hills. Chaz led them off the marked road into a narrow cleft barely wide enough for 2 horses. After a quarter-mile, the rock opened around a spring. Water collected in a dark basin under an overhang. Cottonwood roots twisted through the stones. Eliza stared. "This isn't on the map." "That helps keep it full." They watered the horses first, then themselves. The spring tasted faintly of iron and cold stone. Eliza sat with her back against the wall while Chaz mixed coffee in a blackened tin pot. There was no fire. The day's heat remained trapped in the rock. "Did my father know this place?" "Yes." "Of course he did." "He complained the water tasted like nails." "He would." Chaz poured her half a cup. The coffee was weak and smoky. She drank it anyway. After a while she said, "Why did you come?" "You ask that?" "No, I asked who you were." Chasky looked into his cup. Word reached the trading post that Jedediah Bennett had died in debt. "And you rode 2 days because the story sounded wrong?" "Yes. That's not enough. It was for me." Eliza waited. Chask rubbed one thumb over a pale scar near his wrist. "Your father did something for me once. He saved your life?" "No." The answer surprised her. "He told the truth when it cost him." Chask set the cup down. "Years ago, after a patrol went bad, an officer blamed me for leading men into the wrong canyon. I had warned him against the route. Jedediah was the only civilian witness. The officer offered him money and threatened to cancel his supply contracts. Your father testified anyway." Eliza listened. "He lost the contracts?" "For a season. He never told me. He did not think courage needed an audience." For a moment the spring was the only sound. Then Chasky added, "He also never stopped reminding me he had been right." Eliza smiled. "That part I believe." She looked toward the opening of the grotto, where evening had turned the sky lavender. "When this is over, if we win, I don't know what happens." "To what?" "The ranch. You work it. With what cattle?" "Thorne already pushed half my credit out from under me. You rebuild. You say that like rebuilding is a chore you put on a list. It is. A long one." She shook her head. "Home sounds simple when you say it. Home is a choice made many times." Eliza looked at him. "That sounds like something my father would have argued with." He did. They slept in turns. At dawn the chipped horseshoe print appeared again. Chasky found it where a side trail joined the main road. "Same horse," he said. "So our friend found another rifle?" "Maybe. Still not worried?" "I did not say that." They changed route. Instead of following the broad wagon road, Chasky led them through a dry wash bordered by greasewood and low mesquite. The detour was slower but hidden. By late afternoon they saw San Carlos. The outpost was little more than a row of weather-beaten buildings, 2 corrals, a store, a telegraph office, and several boarding houses pressed against a slope of reddish dirt. Wagons stood in ruts baked hard as brick. People watched Eliza and Chasky ride in. Some watched because strangers always drew attention. Some watched Chask for other reasons. Eliza saw his face close slightly, not fear habit. He directed her toward a livery stable without comment. The stable owner knew Barnaby Finch. "Pale fellow? Bank clerk?" "Yes, been boarding at Mrs. Dray's place. Owes her $6 already. Did anyone come looking for him?" The stableman paused. "Man in a brown coat 2 days back asked the same thing. Did Finch speak to him?" "Not that I saw." Chask put a coin on the rail. "Which room?" "Back upstairs. Window toward the alley." Eliza and Chasky left the horses fed and walked the last block. Mrs. Dray's boarding house smelled of boiled cabbage before they even reached the porch. The woman who answered the door was 60, broad-shouldered, and unimpressed by nearly everything. "Mr. Finch does not receive callers after dark." "It isn't dark," Eliza said. "He doesn't receive them before dark either." Chasky said, "Is he ill?" Mrs. Dray looked at him, then at Eliza. "He's frightened." "That can make a person ill," Chask said. Something in his tone made the woman step aside. "Back room. If he breaks anything, you pay." Barnaby Finch was seated on the edge of a narrow bed, with both hands submerged in a ceramic wash basin. He looked smaller than he had behind the brass bars of the bank. His shirt collar was open. His hair stuck damply to his forehead. At the sight of Eliza, he stood so quickly the basin overturned. Water spread across the floor. "No." Eliza closed the door. Barnaby backed into the wall. No, you can't be here." "We rode a long way to disappoint you," she said. His teeth began to click, click, click. Chask heard it. Eliza saw that he heard it. Barnaby tucked his hands under his arms. "What do you want?" Eliza took the red cedar letters from her satchel. Barnaby stared at the bundle, his face drained. "You know these?" "No." "You've copied from them?" "No." "You've copied from something with my father's hand." Barnaby looked toward the window. Chask moved, not to block it exactly, but to stand where leaving through it would require a conversation. Eliza untied the ribbon. She laid one letter on the small table, then the charcoal impression from the ledger. Barnaby's breathing changed. "You stopped on the B," she said. He shook his head. "The same place every time." "I don't know what you're talking about." "Your hand did. I didn't. You work a pen all day. You know pressure. You know ink. You know what a copied signature looks like when the person copying it is afraid." Barnaby's teeth clicked again. Chask spoke. "Show your fingers." Barnaby stared at him. "What? Your fingers? I don't have to." Chask waited. Barnaby slowly pulled his hands free. The pads of his thumb and first 2 fingers were raw, reddened from scrubbing. Faint violet black remained around the nails. Eliza's stomach tightened. The same color as Thorne's pen. Barnaby covered his hands again. It doesn't prove anything, Chasky said. But you are trying very hard to wash away nothing. Barnaby sat down. His shoulders collapsed. Eliza had imagined this meeting every mile since they left home. In some versions, she struck him. In others, she shouted until he confessed. Standing there now, looking at the frightened little clerk, she felt something colder. You knew my father. Barnaby looked at the floor. He brought deposits to your window. He paid taxes through your office. He signed cattle notes in front of you. Barnaby swallowed. Yes, you knew he was sick. Yes. You knew he was dead when that entry was shown to the town. His mouth trembled. Yes. And you let them call him a gambler. Barnaby covered his face. Eliza's voice remained quiet. Take your hands down. He did. I want you to look at me. It took him several seconds. When he finally did, his eyes were wet. I was in debt, he whispered. Eliza felt Chasky become still behind her. Barnaby rubbed his palms against his trousers. Cards. Then borrowing to pay the cards. Then more cards because I thought one good night would settle the borrowing. It never did. Thorne bought the debt. Barnaby nodded. How much? 800 at first, more after interest, and he offered to forgive it, not forgive. Barnaby gave a broken laugh. He doesn't forgive anything. What did he ask? Barnaby looked at the red cedar letters. Access to old records. Eliza's jaw tightened. Which records? Your father's tax forms, sale receipts, 2 promissory notes, anything with a full signature. And then he made me practice. The room seemed to contract. Barnaby's voice became flatter as he continued, as though he could survive the telling only by removing himself from it. Thorne had rented a back room over the saloon. He brought sheets of cheap paper and a bottle of modern violet-black writing fluid ordered from Chicago. He placed Jedediah Bennett's signatures in front of Barnaby and told him to copy the name, hundreds of times. At first, Barnaby could not reproduce the capital B, then he could reproduce it too carefully. Thorne made him write faster. Barnaby still paused in the same place, the hitch. He said no one would see it, Barnaby whispered. He said people see what they expect to see. Eliza's hand flattened against the table. What did you put in the ledger? A debt entry dated 6 months before his death. Then a note showing the ranch as security. The witnesses paid names. Barnaby named them. 2 men had left the territory. The third worked one of Thorne's ranches. And the old page? Barnaby shut his eyes. Replaced. How? We loosened the binding at night. The new sheet was rubbed with dust and weak tea, then pressed under older pages. Chask asked, the ink? Thorne wanted it dark enough to look official. I told him iron gall would age differently. He said no sheriff in Gilded Creek owned a chemist's eye. He used the same ink himself? Eliza asked. Barnaby nodded. He liked the color. That explained the pen, the stain. The arrogance of a man who had practiced another man's name and believed the town too frightened to examine the hand holding the instrument. Eliza leaned against the table. For weeks she had wanted certainty. Now that she had it, certainty did not feel like triumph. It felt like nausea. My father died thinking the ranch was mine. Barnaby cried silently. You let me wonder whether I ever knew him. I'm sorry. No. The word came out sharper than she intended. Barnaby flinched. Do not give me that because it makes you feel cleaner. His raw fingers curled. What do you want from me? The truth where other people can read it. Barnaby stared at her. If I sign anything, Thorne will kill me. He may kill you if you don't, Chasky said. Barnaby looked toward him. Chasky's voice remained calm. You were moved here after the ledger was filed. A man in a brown coat asked for you 2 days ago. Thorne is not protecting you. Barnaby went very still. What man? We do not know. Barnaby stood and crossed to the window. He looked through the curtain at the alley below. I thought it was over. Eliza almost laughed. It was over for you. That was the convenient part. He turned back. What can you promise me? Eliza thought of Caleb's badge, Thorne's money, the hired rider in the pass. Nothing. Barnaby stared. I can't promise you protection. I can't promise the sheriff will forgive your part. I can't promise the town will. Then why would I sign? Because Thorne has already decided what your silence is worth. No one moved. Mrs. Dre's footsteps crossed the hallway. A wagon rattled outside. Barnaby sat at the small desk. His hand hovered over a sheet of paper. I want the sheriff to know I was coerced. He should know everything. And that I'll testify, if you will. Barnaby looked at her. I will. Chask set a bottle of ordinary black ink beside him. Use your own hand. Barnaby dipped the pen. For the first line, he shook so badly the nib scratched the paper. He stopped, breathed, started again. Eliza watched the words form. I, Barnaby Finch, being of sound mind and acting without promise of payment. The confession took 4 pages. He named Silas Thorne. He described the debt. He described the forged ledger page, the false security note, the witnesses, the replacement of the original sheet, the ink, the practice signatures, and the threat that if he ever spoke, Thorne would make certain nobody found the body. When he finished, Barnaby signed his name. His real signature was ugly, uneven, human. Eliza preferred it to anything she had seen in the bank. Chaz sanded the wet ink. Barnaby pressed both hands flat on the desk. "What now?" "Now we get this to Gilded Creek," Eliza said. Barnaby looked toward the window again. "You won't make it in time." Eliza folded the affidavit. "We didn't come this far to ask permission from time." They left Barnaby before sunrise. Mrs. Dray agreed to keep him inside and say nothing about the visit. She accepted no explanation and only 1 extra coin. "I don't care what trouble he brought here," she told Eliza at the door. "But if men come looking, I'll tell them he ran north." "Why help him?" Mrs. Dray shrugged. "Because frightened men still have to sleep somewhere." The air outside was cold enough to raise bumps on Eliza's arms. Chaz checked the alley before they crossed it. At the stable, the horses were rested but not fresh. Their 3-day ride had left small swellings beneath the saddle blankets. Chaz adjusted the padding and loosened the rear cinch on Eliza's mare. "We push them too hard. We walk home," he said. "If we don't push them, Thorne takes the ranch. A dead horse does not care who owns a ranch." Eliza bit back the reply she wanted to make. He was right. She hated that he was right. They rode out at first light. For an hour the trail was empty. Then Chaz raised one hand. On a rise behind them, far enough away to be only a dark mark against the brightening sky, a rider had stopped. Eliza lifted the field glasses. "Brown coat? Gray horse? Same man? Maybe. You need another word." Chaz's mouth almost moved. They turned into a wash. The rider followed. Not close enough for a shot. Close enough to be certain. At the first fork, Chaz led them east instead of west. "That's wrong," Eliza said. "Yes, Gilded Creek is west." "Yes, do I need to start asking complete questions?" "We make him choose." "Choose what?" "Whether he is following us or traveling." The wash bent around a ridge and narrowed between 2 walls of red rock. They stopped behind a stand of mesquite. 5 minutes later, the gray horse appeared. The man in the brown coat slowed when he saw them waiting. Nobody reached for a gun. Chaz sat quietly on his mare. Eliza kept one hand near the revolver in her saddlebag. The rider smiled. "Morning." Chaz said nothing. "Road to Clifton?" "Other direction," Eliza said. The man looked at her too long. "Appreciate it." He turned his horse. Instead of taking the road to Clifton, he rode back the way he had come. Eliza watched until he disappeared. "Thorne." "Yes," Chaz said. "Finally." "Yes." She let out a breath. The affidavit felt suddenly heavier inside her shirt. They doubled back west. By noon, the mountains behind San Carlos had disappeared into heat haze. The land ahead opened into miles of rough country. Every mile now carrying 2 clocks, the strength of the horses and the hour of the possession order. They did not speak about what would happen if the man in the brown coat reached Thorne first. They did not need to. At a shallow creek, Chaz made them stop. Eliza prosted. He ignored her and stripped the saddles. Steam lifted from the horses' backs. He rubbed them down with handfuls of dry grass, checked their legs, cleaned grit from the girths, and let them drink in small amounts. Eliza sat on a rock with the affidavit in her lap. The pages were wrapped in oilcloth now. She had read them 3 times. Each reading changed something. The first had given her relief, the second anger. The third left her thinking about how ordinary the crime had been. No masked riders, no pistol at her father's head. Just a man with debts, a man with money, a bank after closing, a bottle of ink, and a town trained not to question whoever wore the cleaner coat. Chaz sat beside her. "Paper survives because people agree it means something," she said. "So do fences." "What?" "A fence is only wood until people agree where one man's field ends." Eliza looked toward the horses. "And when somebody moves it, you move it back. Then you make them answer for moving it." She folded the affidavit carefully. "You make everything sound like ranch work. Most things are." They saddled again before the sun dropped. Far behind them, a smear of dust appeared on the trail. This time there were 2 riders. Eliza did not need the field glasses. Chaz looked west. "Night ride. The horses? We give them 1 more hour slow. Then we decide." Eliza touched the oilcloth beneath her coat. Home was still 2 hard days away. Thorne's men were behind them. The deadline was ahead. She leaned forward as her mare stepped into the long shadow of the ridge, and the 2 of them rode toward the dark without pretending there was an easier road. The first night on the return trail was moonless. That helped the men behind them. It also helped Chasky. He left the road before full dark and led the horses along a shelf of stone where the ground held almost no track. They moved single file, slow enough that Eliza could hear each hoof scrape before it settled. Below them, the main trail ran through the basin like a pale ribbon. Once night came, Chasky stopped beneath an overhang and waited. Eliza wrapped the reins around her wrist. For what? Light. They sat in darkness. 10 minutes passed. Then a small orange glow moved along the road below. A lantern. A second glow followed. The riders had assumed Eliza and Chasky would continue through the basin. They'll know we left the trail when they reach our last prints, Eliza whispered. Yes. So we should move, not yet. Why? They are looking down. Eliza listened to the faint clop of hooves. The lights moved farther west. Chasky waited until they had nearly disappeared. Then he took the horses east along the shelf for half a mile before dropping into a dry creek bed that looped back toward Gilded Creek. Eliza understood. If they find where we left the road, they'll think we went east. For a while. How long is a while? Long enough to eat. They stopped behind a low wall of broken stone. There was no fire. Eliza chewed salt pork cold and watched stars come out. Her muscles hurt from her neck to her ankles. A raw patch had formed at the base of her thumb where the reins rubbed. When she closed her eyes, she could still see Barnaby Finch's hand shaking over the affidavit. Chasky ate without hurry. You ever get tired? She asked. Yes. You hide it well. No, you do. I am sitting on the ground eating cold pork in the dark. Eliza considered that. Fair. He handed her the canteen. She drank. The water was warm and tasted of canvas. A coyote called from far off. Another answered. Eliza looked up at the sky. My father taught me the North Star. Chasky nodded. He said a person with one reliable point can cross any darkness. He said many things. You keep ruining my memories of his wisdom. I am improving them. She smiled into the dark. After a moment, Chask pointed. See that line? She followed his hand. 3 bright stars angled above the ridge. Yes. If the ground cannot be read at night, the sky can. What if it clouds over? Then you wait. What if you can't wait? Then you make mistakes. Eliza rubbed her sore palm. You must have been unbearable around my father. He said the same. They rested 2 hours. When they moved again, Chasky set their direction by the stars until the creek bed rejoined a cattle trail west of the basin. At dawn, there was no sign of the riders. The horses were tired. They walked for the first hour, leading them by the reins. The pace felt intolerably slow. Eliza kept calculating distance. If the possession order was executed at noon the next day, they had perhaps 30 hours. Less if Caleb obeyed Thorne early. More if rain or paperwork delayed him. She had no way to know. The uncertainty bothered her more than the miles. By mid-morning, they reached the hidden spring again. This time, Eliza did not ask whether they could afford to stop. They could not afford not to. Chasky checked the animals while she filled the canteens. Her mare had a tender spot beneath the saddle. He shifted the blanket and cut a piece of wool from his bedroll to pat it. You'll ruin that blanket. It is a blanket. That is the first simple thing you've said in 4 days. Chask looked at her. Water is wet, better. They rode on. The heat built. Every gust carried the dry smell of dust and greasewood. Near noon, Chask found the chipped horseshoe print again, not behind them, ahead. He crouched over it. Eliza's stomach tightened. How they circled. Or there are more men. Yes. You sound pleased by that possibility. I am not. The track crossed theirs at a narrow wash and continued west. They know where we're going, Eliza said. They always knew. They had only one road into Gilded Creek from the east that would not cost them another day. The men did not need to catch them. They needed only to delay them. Chask studied the sky. Wind was rising from the south, dry wind, the kind that pulled moisture from lips in minutes. He smelled the air. What? Smoke. Eliza smelled nothing. They rode another mile. Then she did. At first it was only a bitter thread beneath the dust. Then the horizon darkened. A black column rose behind the low hills ahead. Brush fire, Eliza said. Chasky's jaw set. Too straight. They climbed a ridge. Below, orange flame ran across the greasewood along the main trail. Not a natural front. Several separate starts were joining into one. Eliza saw a rider on the far side. Then another. Both turned away before she could raise the field glasses. They set it. Yes. The fire was still half a mile away, but wind drove it hard. The road crossed a stretch of dry brush between a rock face and a steep ravine. There was no easy detour. Eliza's first thought was the affidavit. Her second was the horses. Her third came as heat touched her face from an impossible distance. We go around. Too long. Through, we would not make it. The fire gathered itself. Dry branches snapped loud as pistol shots. Smoke rolled low. Chaz looked behind them. A patch of ground near the ridge had sparse grass and exposed stone. He dismounted. Take the saddles off. Eliza stared. What? Now. She moved. They stripped the saddles, tied wet cloth over the horses' noses, and led them toward the barest patch. Chaz pulled the waxed match tin from his belt. Eliza knew what he meant before he struck one. No. We burn what the fire needs before it gets here. My father talked about backburning. Then listen to him. Chaz lit a clump of grass on the downwind edge. The small flame crawled away from them. Eliza beat its side with her coat, keeping it narrow while it consumed dry fuel toward the approaching fire. Smoke burned her eyes. They worked fast. Too fast for fear to be useful. A strip of black earth widened around the rocky patch. The main fire roared closer. One horse pulled back, wide-eyed. Chaz took the lead rope and stood near its head. Eliza wrapped the affidavit in a second layer of oilcloth and pushed it beneath her shirt. The air changed. It became difficult to breathe. Ash fell before the flames arrived. Tiny black flakes landed on Eliza's sleeves and dissolved into gray smears when she brushed them. Down, Chaz said. They crouched with the horses in the burned strip. The main front reached the edge of their backburn. Flame leaped where fuel remained, then dropped hungry and confused on the blackened ground. Heat rolled over them in a wall. Eliza buried her face in the damp cloth at her neck. The noise was enormous. For several minutes the world contained nothing but wind, fire, and animals trying not to panic. Then the front moved past, not gone. Past, flames continued uphill on both sides, but the black strip around them held. Eliza raised her head. Chaz's face was streaked with soot. A small burn had reddened his left forearm. You're hurt. Later. Let me see, later. The saddles had survived under a wool blanket on the bare rock. They waited until the worst heat moved west. Then they saddled and walked the horses through ash. The landscape had changed color. Where the basin had been yellow and green, it was now black. Smoking stems leaned in every direction. Eliza found a piece of wire stretched low across the trail at the far end of the burn. She stopped. The wire had been tied between two shrubs at horse-knee height. Chaz. He came back. The wire was new. The cut ends shone. They wanted us to ride fast through smoke, Eliza said. Yes, and hit this. Yes. She looked toward the west. The men had not simply tried to delay them. They had planned for the possibility that fire did not. Something in Eliza settled. For weeks, Thorne's power had seemed abstract. Paper, credit, influence, polite men at counters. The wire was not abstract. Neither was the burn on Chaz's arm. She cut the wire with pliers and wound it into a coil. What are you doing? Taking it. Why? Because Caleb likes physical evidence. Chaz nodded once. They rode until dark. The horses could not be pushed farther. Chaz said so, Eliza argued. He said it again. She slid from the saddle and nearly fell when her knees gave. That ended the argument. They camped in a shallow wash. Chaz cleaned the burn on his arm with water. Eliza tore a strip from the lining of her petticoat and wrapped it. He watched her tie the knot. You don't have to make it that tight. It will come loose. It will cut off my hand. Then complain less and keep the hand. He almost smiled. She sat back. I'm sorry. For the bandage? For bringing you into this. Chaz looked toward the black sky above the wash. You did not bring me. You came because of my father. Yes, which means I inherited the trouble. No. He flexed his bandaged arm. I chose it. Eliza pulled her knees toward her chest. The affidavit crackled under her shirt. If we get there too late, we still have the confession. Thorne could take the deed. A deed can be returned. He could empty the house. Things can be returned. He could tear down the barn. We could build another. She looked at him. You are infuriating. Yes. What if he ruins my father's name before we get there? Chaz was quiet. Then he said, a name is not ruined because liars repeat something. It is ruined when nobody answers. Eliza looked away. I'm trying to answer. I know. They rose before the sky lightened. By noon the next day, the Bennett ranch appeared in the distance. Eliza nearly cried at the sight of the windmill. Then she saw riders in the yard. 4 horses, a wagon, Caleb, 2 deputies. Silas Thorne, they were already there. Eliza kicked her mare forward. Chaz caught her rein. The horse, I don't care, she does. Eliza's breath came hard. He was right again. They approached at a controlled trot. Thorne stood on the porch holding a folded document. Caleb was near the well. One deputy carried a sack of flour with a split corner. A white line marked part of the yard, a crude boundary laid according to the survey map. Eliza pulled up at the gate. Everyone turned. For 1 second, nobody spoke. Thorne recovered first. "Miss Bennett, how dramatic." She dismounted. Her legs trembled. Soot covered her clothes. Her hair had come loose. The hem of her skirt was torn. Chasky looked worse. Thorne looked as though he had dressed for a luncheon. Caleb took in their condition. "What happened?" "Ask him," Eliza said. Thorne sighed. "I assure you, Sheriff, I have been here since morning. I didn't say he lit the fire." Caleb's eyes sharpened. "What fire?" "Later." The deputy resumed pouring flour. Eliza walked to the white line. She looked at it, then at Caleb. "What is this?" "Temporary demarcation pending transfer. You could have waited." Caleb removed his hat. The order was effective at noon. Eliza checked the sun. It was not yet directly overhead. "You're early." Thorne lifted his pocket watch. "By the county clock, 11 minutes past. Your watch runs fast." "My watch is certified." Eliza laughed once. It sounded ugly. She stepped into the line and dragged her boot through the flour. The white powder burst across the red dirt. The deputy stopped. Thorne's face tightened. "Eliza," she kicked the line again. "Do not draw borders around my life with something I use to make bread." Caleb raised a hand. "That's enough." "No, it isn't." She reached inside her shirt. The oilcloth packet was damp with sweat. She pulled out the affidavit. Thorne saw it. For the first time since Eliza had known him, he lost control of his face, only for a moment, but enough. Caleb saw it too. "What is that?" "A sworn statement from Barnaby Finch." Thorne's expression rebuilt itself. "Barnaby Finch is a debtor and a thief who fled his employment." "That is convenient." "Eliza," Caleb said, "give me the paper." She did. Thorne stepped down from the porch. "I must object to any document obtained through intimidation." Chasky moved between him and Caleb without appearing to hurry. Thorne stopped. Caleb unfolded the affidavit. His lips moved as he read. The yard grew quiet. A fly circled the flour sack. One of the horses stamped. Caleb read all 4 pages. When he finished, he looked at Thorne. "Is this true?" "Obviously not." Finch names the witnesses. "Disgruntled men say many things." He describes replacing a ledger page. Fantasy. He describes your ink. At that, Thorne glanced at the silver pen in his vest. A small mistake. Caleb saw it. Eliza saw Caleb see it. Thorne withdrew the pen and held it up. "This proves I own a pen?" "No," Eliza said. "It proves you still use the same ink. Finch says you brought into the room when you copied my father's name." "You are taking the word of a coward." "I'm taking his word with the mark your hand keeps leaving on everything." Thorne looked down. Violet black stained the side of his thumb. His fist closed. Caleb folded the affidavit. "Possession is suspended." Thorne stared. "You don't have authority to suspend a filed transfer. I have authority to investigate fraud." "On the word of that man?" "On a sworn confession detailed enough to require investigation." Thorne pointed at Chask. "This is his doing. You're allowing an Apache scout to interfere with territorial property law." Caleb's jaw hardened. "What I'm allowing is evidence." Thorne's voice rose. "You have a duty." "Yes," Caleb said. "I'm beginning to remember that." The words hung between them. Eliza looked at the sheriff. She did not forgive him for needing this much help, but she recognized the first useful thing he had done. Caleb turned to his deputy. "Stop the survey." The flour sack was set down. Thorne laughed. "You think this changes the debt?" "I have the original ledger in town. I have the note. I have witnesses." Chasky spoke for the first time. "Bring the ledger." Thorne looked at him. "Excuse me, bring it into the sun." Something moved in Thorne's face. Fear, perhaps, or calculation. He covered it with contempt. "You have no standing here." Chasky's burned arm hung at his side beneath Eliza's bandage. "No, but the book does." Caleb looked from one man to the other. "Silas, where is the ledger?" "At the bank." "Then we are going to the bank." Thorne's jaw tightened. "You would drag private records into the street?" "If necessary." Eliza said, "Do it in the square." Caleb glanced at her. "So everybody who repeated the story can watch it come apart." Thorne's eyes went cold. "You have become very theatrical, Miss Bennett." "No, I learned from you." They rode back to Gilded Creek together. Not as a procession, more like opposing pieces trapped on the same board. Caleb rode beside Thorne. The deputies followed. Eliza and Chasky came behind them, conserving the horses. At the edge of town, people began stepping onto porches. News moved faster than hooves. By the time they reached the bank, a crowd had formed. Caleb went inside with one deputy. Thorne tried to follow. Caleb stopped him at the door. "You wait here. I own notes in that bank. You don't own me." A murmur moved through the crowd. Thorne turned. He saw shopkeepers, ranch hands, women from the church guild, 2 men from the livery, the blacksmith, and Reuben Sloane standing near the hotel. Sloane avoided his eye. That frightened Thorne more than the sheriff's words had. Caleb returned carrying the leather ledger. Barnaby Finch's confession remained folded in his pocket. He placed the ledger on a table the deputy had brought from the bank. The table stood in full sunlight at the edge of the square. Eliza felt her pulse in her throat. The book looked exactly as it had the first day. Dark leather, brass corners, a thing that had nearly become stronger than every memory she possessed. Caleb opened it. Thorne stepped closer. "You are making a spectacle of a lawful account." Caleb ignored which entry. Eliza turned the pages. Her finger stopped above the false debt. There. Chasky took the magnifier from around his neck. He held it out to Caleb. "Look at the B." Thorne scoffed. "A scratch under a lens will not overturn a debt. Then you have nothing to worry about," Eliza said. Caleb took the lens. He leaned over the page. The crowd pressed closer. Chasky did not tell the sheriff what to see at first. He let him look. Caleb moved the glass. His brow tightened. "What am I looking for?" "The first upward curve in Bennett." Caleb shifted the lens. "There's a dark spot." A pause. "Could be anything." "Yes." Chask pointed to one of the red cedar letters Eliza had laid beside the ledger. Now his true hand. Caleb compared them. The sun was bright enough to show every fiber. The old signature cut into the paper with a firm, continuous groove. The ledger signature was flatter. The copied B held the tiny stop. The final T showed another. Caleb looked up. Thorne said, "You are not a handwriting expert." "No, neither is he." Chask met his gaze. "No," Thorne spread his hands. "Then this is nonsense." A voice came from the edge of the crowd. Not entirely. Dr. Elias Henderson stepped forward from the apothecary porch. He was a spare man with wire spectacles and sleeves usually marked by powders from his work. He looked at the papers, then at Caleb. "You want the ink looked at?" Caleb nodded. "If you can." Henderson adjusted his glasses. "I can tell you some things. Not everything." That distinction mattered to Eliza. It was the first cautious sentence anyone in Gilded Creek had offered about the ledger. The doctor examined the genuine letter, then the disputed entry. He smelled the page. Thorne laughed loudly. "This is absurd." Henderson ignored him. "Jedediah used iron gall ink in the older letters." "He mixed it himself," Eliza said. "I remember. He once stained my counter with a bottle of it." A few people in the crowd smiled. The memory was ordinary. That made it powerful. Henderson turned to the ledger. "This is a different formulation, which proves nothing," Thorne said. "By itself, no." The doctor looked at Caleb. "But if Finch says the entry was made recently with modern violet-black writing fluid, that can be examined. How? Solubility, oxidation, penetration of the fibers." Thorne stepped toward the table. Caleb blocked him with one arm. Henderson asked for distilled water and a clean needle from his shop. His assistant ran to fetch them. Eliza stood with both hands pressed against her skirt. Chasky's face gave nothing away. The assistant returned. Henderson dipped the needle in water. "Only a point," he said. "On the detail of the disputed signature." Thorne's voice sharpened. "You will damage legal evidence." Caleb looked at him. "I thought it was just a lawful account." The doctor touched the wet needle to the ink. At first nothing happened. Then a faint violet stain feathered outward. The crowd leaned in. Henderson repeated the test on the margin of one of Jedediah's old signatures, using barely enough moisture to wet a pinhead. The old brown-black line did not bloom the same way. He lifted both pages. "The inks are different. The ledger entry is more soluble and sits closer to the surface." Thorne's face paled. Henderson continued before anyone could turn caution into certainty. "That does not tell me the exact date, but it is consistent with Finch's statement and inconsistent with the claim that this signature was made in Jedediah Bennett's usual ink." Caleb nodded slowly. Chasky said, "The binding." Everyone looked at him. He pointed to the inner edge of the disputed sheet. Finch said the page was replaced. Caleb bent down again. The ledger stitching was old and dark except around the Bennett page, where 2 holes had been widened. A small line of newer thread showed beneath the spine. The bank manager, who had emerged into the square during the examination, went gray. "That shouldn't be there." Thorne turned on him. "Be quiet." The manager looked at Thorne, then at the crowd, then back at the book. "No," he said. "I don't think I will." The manager's name was Amos Bell. For 15 years he had cultivated the expression of a man who believed surprise was a failure of bookkeeping. Nothing startled him in public. Not a bank run, not a drought, not a drunk rancher pounding the counter with a revolver in his belt. Now his hands shook as he turned the ledger toward himself. He touched the widened binding holes. "I signed the annual audit on this volume in January." Thorne's eyes narrowed. "Amos, Bell did not look at him. The pages were numbered by hand when the book was opened. Each sheet was stitched in sequence. If this leaf was replaced, the number should have transferred. He held the page up to the sun. A faint impression showed near the upper corner where the paper had been rubbed and dirtied. The written page number looked old. The indentation beneath it did not. Bell swallowed. Someone traced the original number. The square became very quiet. Thorne's confidence did not collapse all at once. It changed shape. He stopped arguing with the evidence and began measuring exits. Eliza saw his eyes move toward the bank door, then the hotel alley, then Reuben Sloane. Sloane stepped farther into the crowd. Caleb saw it too. "Silas," he said, "stay where you are." Thorne laughed. It sounded thin. "You are going to arrest me because a frightened clerk made a statement and a druggist wet a page?" "I haven't said arrest. You are thinking it. I'm thinking you should stop moving." Thorne looked at Eliza. For weeks he had addressed her as though she were a slow child, someone whose feelings could be managed until the papers finished their work. There was none of that softness now. "You have no idea what you are doing." Eliza rested one hand on the table. "I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm asking people to look. You think this town survives on sentiment? Land changes hands. Debts are collected. Weak ranches become stronger ranches. That is how the territory grows. My father's ranch wasn't yours to strengthen. It was failing. It was mine. You couldn't have kept it." The words landed harder than his earlier insults, because some part of Eliza had asked herself the same question in the dark. Could she keep it? Could she rebuild the herd, clear the ditch, make winter feed, pay taxes, repair the roof, and still have strength to wake the next morning? Chasky stood at her right shoulder. He did not answer for her. Eliza looked at Thorne. That was mine to find out. A murmur moved through the crowd. Thorne's mouth tightened. Caleb opened Barnaby's affidavit again. "You paid Finch's gambling debt? I purchased a note. And then he altered your ledger? If he did, he acted alone. Why would he create a debt payable to your associate? Ask him. We will." Caleb looked toward one deputy. "Wire the San Carlos marshal. Have Finch held as a material witness. Not a fugitive. Tell him I'm sending a man." Thorne took one step backward. The deputy's hand went to his belt. "Mr. Thorne." Silas stopped. Eliza remembered the flower line in her yard. She remembered her father's wet signature on seed orders. She remembered Caleb refusing her coffee on credit. She remembered the black carriage in the road, the false concern, the 4 days, the fire. She reached beneath her saddlebag and removed the coil of wire. It was blackened in places from smoke. She put it on the table beside the ledger. Caleb frowned. "What's that?" "Found across the trail after the brush fire. Knee-height for a horse." The crowd stirred. Thorne's face did not change. "Are you accusing me of setting a fire now?" Eliza looked at him. "I'm saying someone wanted us delayed. Someone on a gray horse in a brown coat followed us from San Carlos. Someone set several lines of fire along the only fast route home. Someone tied that wire where a horse coming through smoke would hit it. That is a story, yes." She turned to Caleb. "And I can't prove who tied it." Thorne smiled faintly. Eliza continued. "But I can prove who benefited if we did not get back before noon." The smile disappeared. Caleb took the wire. "I'll keep it." "Do." Thorne looked around the square. The town had changed. Not morally. Not completely. Fear had simply changed owners. The same men who had once lowered their eyes when Silas passed were now watching him with the attention people gave a cracked dam. Shopkeepers whispered to one another. Ranchers who owed him money stood very still. A woman Eliza knew from church stared at the ledger as though it might contain her own family's name somewhere farther back. That realization moved through the crowd without anyone announcing it. If one page could be replaced, others could be. A rancher named Owen Pike stepped forward. "Sheriff." Caleb looked at him. "Thorne holds a note on my west pasture." Silas snapped, "This has nothing to do with you." Pike ignored him. "I want my papers examined." Another voice followed. "So do I." Then another. Amos Bell closed his eyes briefly. Eliza almost pitied him, almost. The bank manager had spent years believing order came from keeping unpleasant things quiet. Now every quiet thing was asking to be opened. Caleb placed one hand on the ledger. "This book is evidence." Thorne's face hardened. "You cannot seize a bank record." Bell surprised everyone. "Yes, he can." Silas turned. Bell met his gaze. "If the institution has been used to commit fraud, I would prefer the sheriff seize it before the territorial examiner seizes the entire bank." The words struck harder than any accusation. Thorne's authority had always depended on rooms becoming smaller when he entered. Now the square seemed enormous around him. Caleb removed his handcuffs. I am detaining you pending investigation of fraud, conspiracy, and falsification of property records. Thorne stared at the iron. You will regret this, probably. You have no idea who I know in Tucson. I know who's standing in front of me. The deputy stepped closer. For a moment, Eliza thought Thorne might reach for the small pistol under his coat. Chaz thought so too. His body shifted half a step. That was all. Thorne saw him. Whatever calculation he made ended there. He held out his wrists, the cuffs closed. The click was smaller than Eliza had expected. After all the papers, speeches, writers, threats, and dust, Silas Thorne's defeat made the sound of a kitchen latch. The crowd did not cheer. Eliza was grateful. Cheering would have made them all innocent too quickly. Caleb handed the ledger to his deputy. Lock this in the evidence cabinet. Then he faced Eliza. The transfer is void for today. I'll send the affidavit and the book to the territorial judge with an emergency petition. Until the court rules, nobody touches your land. For today, she repeated, it's the most I can do before a judge sees it. It was not a perfect victory. That made Eliza trust it more. When will that happen? I'll telegraph this afternoon. Prescott can respond by tomorrow if the line stays up. Thorne, standing between the deputies, laughed bitterly. You think one judge will undo a signed security instrument? Caleb turned. I think you've spoken enough. He was led toward the jail. People moved aside. Some looked at Eliza as he passed. Their faces had changed too. Pity had become admiration in a few, guilt in more, curiosity in most. She disliked all three. Reuben Sloane approached with his hat in both hands. Miss Bennett, I want you to know I was only authorized to make an offer. I had no knowledge of. Eliza walked past him. At the general store, Caleb's wife, Ruth, came out carrying a wrapped parcel. Eliza stopped. Ruth held out coffee. Not the cheap chicory blend. Real coffee. Take it. Eliza looked at the parcel, then at Ruth. I can pay. I didn't mean. I know. Eliza took out her purse. Ruth's face reddened. You don't have to. I do. She counted the coins into Ruth's palm. Not because she wanted to punish her, because she needed the transaction to be ordinary again. Ruth closed her fingers around the money. All right, Eliza took the coffee. Thank you. That was as close to reconciliation as she could manage. Chaz waited near the horses. He had tightened Eliza's saddle cinch and checked the mare's tender spot. The everyday care of it steadied her more than the crowd. Caleb came from the sheriff's office while a deputy locked Thorne inside. Eliza. She turned. He removed his hat. Again. She thought of the first evening at the pump. There had been dust on his boots then too. I owe you an apology, he said. Yes. The simple answer startled him. I should have looked harder. Yes, I knew Jedediah. You knew him when it was easy. Caleb stared at his hat. She did not enjoy saying it. That mattered. A cruel truth would have felt good. This one only felt necessary. I let the paper do my thinking, he said. Eliza looked at the sheriff's star. You let Thorne do it. Caleb nodded. I did. The admission made anger less useful, but not less deserved. He lifted his eyes. I'll make this right. No. He frowned. You'll do your job. That is different. Eliza mounted. Caleb stepped back. She did not forgive him. Not that day. Perhaps not later. Forgiveness, she had learned, was not another debt she had to pay, just because someone finally presented the correct paperwork. She and Chaz rode home in late afternoon. The sun had moved west, softening the road. Neither hurried. For the first mile, Eliza expected someone to call after them. No one did. Gilded Creek fell behind. The deed was not yet legally restored. Thorne was not yet convicted. The territorial judge could still ask questions. There would be hearings, statements, perhaps months of work. Yet the air felt different, not free of trouble, free of the particular lie that had kept her awake. At the dry creek bed, Eliza looked at Chaz. You hardly spoke back there. You had enough people speaking. You found the hitch. You saw it too. You got into the bank. You got everyone to look the other way. You found the ink. Finch explained it. You found Finch. The stableman did. Eliza shook her head. Is it painful for you to accept thanks? Yes. Good. Thank you. Chaz looked ahead. After several seconds he said, You are welcome. The words were so reluctant that Eliza laughed. The Bennett ranch appeared before sunset. The flower line was still visible in parts of the yard. Eliza dismounted, walked to the nearest white patch, and scattered it with her boot. Chaz took the saddles into the barn. She carried the coffee inside. The house smelled closed. Hot wood, stale air, cedar. She opened the windows. Then she stood in the kitchen with both hands on the table. Nothing had moved. The red cedar letters were safe in her satchel. Her father's chair remained under the desk. a spoon she had left in a cup before the journey was still there. For several minutes she simply listened. Chasky worked outside. Leather creaked, a horse blew softly. The pump handle knocked once. Home, she thought, was not a feeling. It was a collection of sounds you noticed when they almost belonged to someone else. The telegraph reply came the next afternoon. Caleb rode out alone. Eliza saw him from the irrigation ditch and wiped her hands on her skirt. Chaz was repairing the south fence. Caleb stopped by the gate. He did not enter until she nodded. "I have the judge's order." Eliza's throat tightened. Caleb dismounted and handed her a folded paper. She read slowly. The security transfer was suspended and the deed returned to Bennett possession pending final adjudication. The court had ordered examination of Thorne's related property claims and directed that Barnaby Finch be transported under protection to give testimony. Not final, but enough. At the bottom, the judge had written in a firm hand that no action against the Bennett property would proceed on the disputed note. Eliza read that sentence twice. Caleb waited. Thorne, still in custody. His lawyer arrived this morning. And Finch? San Carlos Marshal has him. What about the witnesses? One has been found in Globe. The other two are being traced. Eliza folded the order. Thank you. Caleb nodded. He looked toward Chasky at the fence. Tell him. He stopped. Eliza waited. Caleb put on his hat. I'll tell him myself another time. That, too, was better than the easy version. He rode away. Eliza carried the order into the house. For 7 weeks, the deed had lived in her mind like a body under a sheet. Now she opened the desk drawer and removed the original. The paper was worn at the folds. Jedediah had bought the first parcel before Eliza was born, then added acreage whenever a dry year made neighbors sell cheap. He had never become rich. He had simply become rooted. She placed the judge's order beneath the deed. Then she took out the red cedar letters. For days they had been evidence. She did not want them to be evidence anymore. She untied the ribbon. The top letter was dated 28 years earlier. My dear Margaret. Eliza stopped. She had not read the words in years, only the signatures. She sat in her father's chair and read. Jedediah complained about rain. He complained about a foreman. He described a stew so bad even the camp dog had refused it. He asked whether baby Eliza had stopped pulling her mother's hair. Halfway down the page, he wrote that he had found a man named Chaz who could walk across stone and still leave an argument behind him. Eliza laughed. Outside, a hammer stopped. Chaz appeared in the doorway. What? She held up the letter. My father called you argumentative. He was jealous. Of what? I was right more often. She looked back at the page. At the bottom was the signature that had saved the ranch. Not because ink possessed magic. Because enough ordinary examples of a man's life had survived to expose someone who tried to manufacture another version. Eliza touched the paper once and put it away. A week later, Amos Bell sent a wagon from Gilded Creek. Inside were 6 boxes of copied account records. Caleb had ordered the bank reviewed. Eliza did not open them. They were not hers. She only watched the wagon pass toward town again after the driver stopped for water. News came in pieces after that. One witness admitted Thorne had paid him $50 to sign a statement saying Jedediah had acknowledged the debt. Another disappeared east. Reuben Sloan hired a lawyer and insisted he had known nothing beyond the purchase offer. Amos Bell resigned from the bank before the territorial examiner arrived. Thorne remained in custody. Barnaby Finch returned under guard and repeated his confession in front of the judge. Eliza attended because she had to. She wore the brown skirt. Barnaby looked at her from the witness chair. He looked older than he had in San Carlos. When the judge asked whether anyone had forced him to sign the affidavit, he said no. When asked why he had done it, Barnaby stared at his own hands. Because I was afraid of Mr. Thorne. The judge asked why he had confessed. Barnaby looked toward Eliza. Because I became more afraid of myself. Eliza felt no satisfaction, only fatigue. The court invalidated the Bennett debt and returned the deed without qualification. Thorne was held for trial on fraud, conspiracy, falsification of records, and related charges. The brush fire remained a separate investigation. Eliza told Caleb exactly where she had found the wire and exactly what she had seen. Nothing more. She refused to improve the truth for the sake of a better ending. After the hearing, people stopped her in the square. Too many, some apologized. Some said they had never truly believed the gambling story. Those were the hardest to listen to. If they had not believed it, they had still let it work. Owen Pike offered to help repair her barn roof. Eliza accepted. That surprised her. Not because she had forgotten his silence, but because rebuilding alone to prove a point would still leave her with a leaking roof. Ruth Miller extended store credit again. Eliza used it sparingly. Caleb came twice to mend fence. The first visit was uncomfortable. The second was less so. Nobody declared the town healed. It wasn't. But people began behaving differently in small ways, and Eliza had come to trust small changes more than speeches. The ranch had suffered while she was fighting for it. 2 cattle were gone. The north gate sagged. The irrigation ditch clogged again after the storm. A section of roof above the tack room leaked. Winning had not completed the chores. It had only made them hers again. 3 weeks after the court ruling, Chaz saddled his mare before sunrise. Eliza found him in the barn tightening a strap. Her stomach tightened in a way she disliked. "You're leaving, yes. For where?" "South first." "Then?" He shrugged. She leaned against the stall. The barn smelled of hay, leather, horse sweat, and the sharp pine tar they had used on the repaired roof. "You could have mentioned it." "I am mentioning it." "With the saddle already packed." "Yes." "That is not how mentioning works." Chaz finished the strap. "The case is done." Eliza looked at the mare. A bedroll was tied behind the saddle. His rifle was in the scabbard. Everything he owned seemed ready to leave in 10 minutes. The thought made the barn feel larger. "The south fence isn't done. You can finish it. I know." "The ditch gate needs another board. I know." "The mare in the east paddock has a loose shoe. I know that too." Chaz looked at her. Eliza folded her arms. She had spent weeks learning how to say difficult things without dressing them in pride. Apparently the lesson had limits. "There's a room in the barn loft. Yes, it's dry now. Yes, I can't pay much until the herd improves." Chaz waited. "The south fence does need work. You said that. And I make better coffee than you." "That is true." She glared. He almost smiled. Eliza took a breath. "You came here because my father once told the truth when it cost him. Fine, that debt is paid. If you insist on calling it one." "I never called it a debt." "Then stop acting like the end of the court case means you have to disappear." The barn went quiet. A horse shifted in the next stall. Eliza continued before courage changed its mind. "I don't need someone to save me. I do need help. There's work here, there is food, there is a place to sleep. If you want a place that doesn't move every night, you can have one." Chaz rested one hand on the saddle. "For how long? I don't know. That is not a very precise offer. Neither was your arrival." He looked toward the open barn door. Morning light had begun to turn the yard gray. Eliza added more quietly, "Stay until you have a reason not to." For a long moment he did not answer. Then he untied the bedroll from the saddle. He set it on a hook. Eliza let out the breath she had been holding. "That means yes?" "It means the south fence needs work." She smiled despite herself. "You are unbearable." "Yes." They ate breakfast in the kitchen, salt pork, cornbread, coffee, real coffee this time, though Eliza stretched it with chicory out of habit. Chaz sat in her father's old place without claiming it, simply because that chair had the best angle to the window. For the first few days after he stayed, Eliza expected the arrangement to feel temporary. Then ordinary things began to accumulate. His spare knife appeared beside the sharpening stone. A second cup remained upside down near the basin. His hat hung on a peg inside the back door when the wind was high. He repaired the loft steps. She mended a tear in his shirt without asking. They argued about the placement of a new gate. He was right. She built it where she wanted anyway. A month later, they moved it. 2 weeks after Chaz stayed, Eliza went back to the bank for the first time. She had avoided the building since the hearing. There were other ways to buy nails and feed, other places to cash a cattle payment, but the 6 calves she wanted were being sold by a widow north of town who needed payment at once. Eliza had enough for 4. Amos Bell's replacement was a younger banker named Samuel Reese, sent from Prescott while the territorial examiners worked through the old records. He did not know Jedediah. Eliza found that useful. She sat across from him at a plain desk. "No speeches," she said. Reese blinked. "I beg your pardon? I need $80. The calves are worth more than the note. I can repay after spring sale if winter doesn't kill them." He looked at her papers. "That is unusually direct. I've had enough decorative banking." Reese almost smiled. He examined the deed, the court order, her feed costs, the remaining herd, and the figures she had written in a small notebook. He asked questions Eliza disliked. She answered them anyway. At last he slid a note across the desk. The interest was higher than she wanted. She argued it down by 1 point. Reese produced a pen. Eliza looked at it. For a moment the room seemed to narrow around the little instrument. She remembered Thorne's manicured thumb. Barnaby's shaking hand, her father's false name sitting dark on the stolen page. Reese mistook her silence. If you want time to review, no. Eliza took the pen. She read the note again from top to bottom. $80. 6 months. No claim on the homestead. Security limited to the 6 calves. She changed one phrase in the margin and made Reese initial it. Then she signed. Eliza M. Bennett. The nib scratched louder than it should have. Her signature was not elegant. The E opened too wide. The final T leaned backward. She pressed hard enough to leave a groove. Reese sanded the page. Eliza kept looking at her name. For weeks a signature had been the shape of a trap. This one was a choice. She paid for the calves that afternoon. On the ride home, 6 bawling young cattle followed behind a drover, while Chasky rode at the rear, and complained that she had chosen the most stubborn animals in the territory. They were cheaper, Eliza called back. They were cheaper for a reason. They'll grow. If they survive their own foolishness, then they already belong here. Chask shook his head. At the ranch, one calf broke toward the garden. Another tangled itself in a gate rope, and a third planted all 4 feet and refused to enter the corral. Eliza spent an hour covered in dust and laughing so hard she could barely hold the fence open. The note from the bank sat folded in her pocket. She did not resent its weight. She had read every word before putting her name beneath it. Winter approached slowly. The nights sharpened. Frost silvered the trough before sunrise. The work did not become easier, but it became shared. Eliza bought 6 calves with money from the sale of an unused wagon. Chask repaired the windmill brake. Caleb found a buyer for the old plow. Owen Pike brought cedar posts in exchange for 2 days of help branding in spring. None of it resembled the grand restoration Eliza might once have imagined. It was better. One cold evening she stood at the pump. The handle groaned. 1 stroke, 2, 3. Water came up clear. It struck the bucket with the same hollow ring she remembered from the evening Caleb brought the notice. Eliza stopped pumping. The yard was blue with dusk. Smoke rose from the chimney. Through the kitchen window, lamplight fell across the table. Chask was inside, cleaning a rifle with a rag. He looked up as if he felt her watching. Eliza lifted the bucket. Near the gate, the cedar post he had once used to prove who he was stood straight after the repair. She crossed the yard. At the porch, she paused to scrape mud from her boots. A folded newspaper from Gilded Creek lay on the bench. Caleb had left it that afternoon. The front page carried a small notice about Silas Thorne's coming territorial trial. Eliza had not read it. She picked up the paper now. For a moment she thought she might. Then she folded it around kindling and carried it inside. Chask glanced at the paper. News, firewood. That bad? Useful. She poured water into the kettle. The kitchen smelled of beans simmering with onion and a little bacon fat. Her father's desk stood in the parlor. The top drawer held the deed, the court order, and the red cedar letters. She no longer checked them every night. That was how she knew the danger had finally become memory. Chask set the cleaned rifle aside. The north pasture gate is dragging. I know. We should lift the hinge tomorrow. I know. The weather will turn. You say that every night. One night I will be right. Eliza put 2 cups on the table. You should write it down so there's evidence. He looked at her, then slowly smiled. It was not a large smile. It did not need to be. Eliza sat. Outside, the desert cooled under a clear sky. The ranch remained poor by Silas Thorne's measure. The roof still needed shingles. The herd was smaller than it had been under Jedediah. There was debt, though honest debt now, written in Eliza's own hand and attached to things she had actually bought. There would be drought again. There would be sickness. There would be people who mistook a clean coat for a clean conscience. None of that had changed. What had changed was simpler. Eliza knew the sound of a lie being accepted in a room. She knew how quickly neighbors could turn uncertainty into judgment if the judgment made life easier. She knew that law could be used like a fence, to protect a boundary or steal one. And she knew that truth, when it finally arrived, rarely came as a shining revelation. Sometimes it came as a bundle of old letters tied with faded ribbon. Sometimes as a clerk's stained fingers. Sometimes as 2 widened holes in the binding of a ledger. Sometimes as a man who had spent his life reading tracts saying, "Look again." She reached for her coffee. The cup was chipped near the rim. It had belonged to her mother. The handle warmed her fingers. Chask tore cornbread in half and handed her the larger piece without comment. Eliza noticed. She said nothing. The fire settled in the stove. From outside came the low thud of a horse shifting in the barn. The pump handle moved once in the wind and gave a soft metal knock. Months earlier, that sound would have pulled Eliza to the window. Now she remained at the table. The land was still there in the morning. So was she. That was enough.